Dan and Amy and President Trump, when he gets back from the overseas trip, he's back on the trail. Trump to hold a campaign rally in Iowa, Cedar Rapids, next week. Thursday, June 1st, will be that rally. The last rally was more than a month ago in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, of course. And this seems to me one of the strategies that Trump is using to deal with a incredibly hostile D.C. press corps, a D.C. press corps that wants to see him removed from office. Clearly, it is to go over and around through Twitter, but better and more importantly, by getting out and speaking with American families without the filter of the Washington Post or the New York Times or CNN.
But my favorite part of his first foreign trip is that his tweets have been very calm, very respectful. He's not attacking anybody. I mean, he, offered his condolences to the people in Manchester. He thanked, Benjamin Netanyahu and others who have, he's met along the way. But they've been very refined.
But
they've been very, do I say, presidential tweets?
Is more disciplined tweeting and campaign rallies, will that be enough to circumvent and otherwise marginalize the D.C. press corps that wants to see him deposed, removed, and Republicans return to minorities in the House and the Senate? For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined again by Mollie Hemingway. She, of course, is a senior editor at The Federalist, thefederalist.com. Always has interesting thought pieces, as does her husband, Mark, over at Weekly Standard. Mm-hmm. And she joins us now. Mollie, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's great to be here with you.
So what about that? Can Trump do a better job of navigating the shark-infested waters of the D.C. press corps for the purposes of advancing both his policy agenda and ultimately maintaining Republican majorities for his term? Are there things that he could be doing other than more disciplined tweeting that Amy was referring to that he isn't doing?
Well, he absolutely could be doing a better job. He needs to be disciplined. I think one thing that's been instructive about the last couple of weeks is even if you knew how hostile the media were towards Donald Trump, you had new understanding of the level of hostility. There is no room for error. There is no room for any nuance. They will put the worst construction on literally every single thing he says or does. They will run stories without the normal level of sourcing or journalistic due diligence that you might expect from major media outlets. And so if that's the climate, he needs to understand that's the climate, and he needs to play ball accordingly.
And the latest thing the mainstream media is doing is they're blaming President Trump for that alleged assault on a reporter from the congressional candidate in Montana.
Yeah, that's actually insane. And the idea that
yes.
The press, which have had horrible ratings for a long time, yes, they've gone off the cliff recently. Yes, they were in barely double digits, like low double digits for Republicans in terms of credibility of the press leading into the elections. I can't imagine how bad they are now. The media have done a lot to break the trust with viewers, readers, and listeners. They have been so hostile to the values and lives and beliefs of many Americans, and that has created a lot of bad blood between the two groups. At the same time, no one thinks it's okay to assault a reporter or anyone else. I mean, that's just completely uncivilized behavior. And if the media can't distinguish between the critiques of them doing a bad job or being really hostile or inappropriate or biased and a call to attack them, it's evidence further of their inability to think through complex topics at any level of detail.
Well, let's square the circle for me. We've got the Harvard study out this week. 80% of the coverage has been negative with respect to Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, 90% negative in Trump's first 100 days as compared to 60% positive for Obama. So that's par for the course with the D.C. press corps. But if they're attacking the values and belief systems of so many Americans such that they're marginalizing themselves, these outlets, then wouldn't it be judicious for Trump just to pay them no mind and let them, give them more rope, as it were, let them do themselves in while he stays focused on his policy agenda?
Yeah, I mean, he needs to stay focused, but also he's just one man, and you would think that even if he's president, he's just one person. And it seems that the Republican Party did not learn terribly many lessons from the 2016 election either, such as you need to fight with a media that's very hostile. There are things that people say on the Republican side of the aisle, like, this is just how the media are, you just have to deal with it. It kind of is reminiscent of when people say, oh, terrorism is just a fact of life, you have to deal with it. I think a lot of Americans and people globally say, no, you don't just have to deal with unjust situations or problems. You do have to deal with it. But the media also needs to think about what they're doing for civil discourse. And yes, part of the problem is that they're so hostile to Trump. Another part of the problem was that they were so friendly to Obama, they couldn't see anything in front of their eyes because they thought he was so perfect. Just this week, we have a story breaking that the Obama administration routinely spied on Americans, violating their Fourth Amendment rights against illegal search and seizure, that they did this for years and that they only announced that they were doing it to the courts. They were supposed to announce this to regularly on their way out of office. This is a rare chance for the media to cover the Obama administration even after it's out of office and do the type of work that would restore some credibility. And you know what? They're not covering it. They're hiding it. And this is dealing with civil liberty violations of Americans. This is supposedly what reporters care about. If they don't care about it here, you kind of question whether they care about it at all.
They're still starstruck. I mean, the same reporters that were covering President Obama when he was in office are with him in Berlin when he's speaking with Angela Merkel today. It's unbelievable. And it's like reunion week for all of them. But I wanted to ask you about another article you wrote about the media spreading fake news about Ivanka Trump. So not only is the mainstream media trying to take down President Trump, but they're also attacking his family.
Yeah, this one came out last week because the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia announced that they would give $100 million to a World Bank fund that is supposed to help with female entrepreneurs. Now, this fund was Ivanka Trump's idea. She thought it would be good for the World Bank to help female entrepreneurs, but she has nothing to do with the fund other than that. She doesn't oversee the fund. She doesn't fundraise. And yet many people in the media, at major media outlets, from CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and others, said that this was an example of this was the type of thing that Donald Trump criticized Hillary Clinton for. Oh, no, it wasn't. In the Hillary Clinton case, this was Clinton and her husband taking money from oligarchs and nations who had business before the State Department while Hillary Clinton was at the State Department. I mean, that is a conflict of interest that is unquestionable, and the lack of transparency in how these deals went down or how much money Bill Clinton was getting for speeches in various countries or whatnot, this was of concern. When you're not benefiting in any way except that you had an idea for a fund that is administered completely by other people, there's not really a similarity. And when you say that there is, it makes it very hard to discuss any other issues about this type of funding by, it's kind of ironic that Saudi Arabia, which oppresses women, would claim to help out in this fund or would do it this way. There are other things that are interesting about it. Ivanka is not the interesting part of it.
Well, and just on this topic area, since their media D.C. press corps so obsessed with Russian collusion and Russian influence in the federal government, Peter Schweitzer, of course, the author of the book Clinton Cash, he reports this week, not picked up in any of these outlets that we're talking about, that in 2011, John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, who was an advisor to Hillary Clinton while she was Secretary of State, joined the board of an energy company that received $35 million in investment from a Russian company. The Russian company, a public company funded by the Kremlin. In fact, the science minister of Russia calls it Putin's child. And that potentially was a violation of federal law for John Podesta, consulting at the time for Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, to not disclose his holdings in State Department disclosure forms. But so the Russian matter doesn't matter. The examples you gave, they don't matter generally. They only matter narrowly as with respect to Trump, if it's a tool that can be used to take down Trump and the Republicans. And as you say, there's a kind of feel a lot wanting from Republican leadership beyond Trump's self-discipline problems.
Right, and that story, I haven't read that yet, but this is yet another example of Russian ties between Clinton and Clinton associates. And if the media actually cared about Russia in intervening in the election or intervening in U.S. politics or being involved in crony capitalism, they would cover these things. I mean, there was a situation where the Clintons were paid a huge pile of cash at the same time that the State Department signed off on giving away a bunch of uranium reserves to Russia. If we really cared, that would be a scandal. And if we don't care, that's why you get this focus on Trump and Russia, despite, I mean, how many times do people in the know have to keep admitting, even though they don't want to, that there's no evidence of collusion between Russia and Trump? And yet this story keeps going. It leads the front pages of newspapers and tops, the news stories at various networks, despite the fact that they're still, after many months of people digging through everything, there being no evidence of same.
And these stories you're talking about, like the New York Times story today about looking for ways to influence Trump. It's basically like a cut and paste of the story from the previous day on the same topic with a different headline. Yeah. I mean, they're just recycling the same story.
They keep repeating the same thing and acting like it's breathless each time they repeat it. But that story is a good example, too, because they say that they have evidence that Russia was trying to influence Trump. Well, that would be in direct opposition to the previous claim that they were colluding together. In a sense, it would refute the claim. Right. But then within the story itself, it says there's absolutely no evidence that they succeeded in trying to influence or whatnot. So why is this top story at the New York Times when it's basically a big nothing burger? And yet this happens drip, 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 day after day, and it has an effect on people's views.
Well, the good news is that in the digital age, in the 21st century, there are many, many outlets that wouldn't exist in a previous era. One of them is The Federalist. Mollie Hemingway is senior editor at The Federalist. So for little context to the New York Times and the Washington Post and watchdogging those outlets that do have influence even when they're using it to, I wouldn't say illegitimate ends. If they want to oppose a president, that's fine. But disingenuous ends, it's good to have outlets like The Federalist. Mollie Hemingway, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.